I had a question come up within the Mastering Laravel community where somebody wanted to know if it was possible, if you had a single Laravel app hosting two different domains, could you have a route that exists on both of the domains but shows different information, or maybe even goes to a different controller or a different view, like two totally separate routes depending on which domain was in the request coming in? So the short answer is yes. Let's take a look at the documentation to prove that this is a feature of Laravel, and also to highlight something that might not be immediately apparent. Notice here it talks about subdomain routing, and it shows if you use this domain method, you can give it a domain name, including a subdomain. You can even make that a parameter that'll get passed into your route. But it doesn't actually show it with just a top-level domain. So the quick question was like, well, yeah, this shows a subdomain. Can I do it with a top-level domain? Yes, you can. Let me show an example of this just to prove that this works. If I go into the Mastering Laravel site in PHP Storm, notice I have two different domain groups set up. All right, so this is the one I normally work on, masteringlaravel.local, but then I have other domain.local, and they're both serving up the same route called domain-demo. The only difference between them is they go to two different views. So this is the setup. This is exactly what the person was asking, like, is this possible? And I'm going to show, yes, it is possible, and it's actually relatively simple to set up. One small thing I'm going to point out, I'm running this site locally with Docker, and I'm actually using an alternate Docker engine called OrbStack. Not the point of this tip, but if you use Docker and you're on a Mac, you might want to check out OrbStack. It's pretty cool. One of the things you can do is very easily assign domains, and it will automatically generate certificates that your local browsers will trust. Is really nice, and this is just one of many features that makes OrbStack nice. But all I had to do was just add a second domain here, and now when I'm running locally on my Docker container here, either one of those domains will serve traffic to this Laravel app. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Let's go back to the browser, and I have in a tab here that first domain grouped route, masteringlaravel.local/domain-demo, and I just threw together a simple view making it really obvious which domain we're on, which route is being served. So this is, pointing it out, we're on this domain, it came from that group. And I have a link here. If I just click, this is going to go, it's basically going to make the same request with a different domain name, other domain.local, and it works, right? There's not a lot more to show here, but it does work, and it's quite simple. Now, there are things you have to keep in mind if you have overlapping routes, maybe that are on a subdomain and a top-level domain. The order in which you specify those matters. That is mentioned in the doc, so I'm not going to go into it in depth here, but I just wanted to call that out. And then, of course, if you're hosting this in production, there's other work you have to do, right? You have to set up DNS records. You have to make sure your web server is serving traffic on both of those domains. That's outside the scope of this tip, but I just wanted to point that out. That is something additional you will need to do. But as far as the routing goes, Laravel makes that very simple to do within our normal routes file. And as a final comment, if you'd like to check out the Mastering Laravel community, head over to masteringlaravel.io and click on the community button. Hope to see you in there.